I'm Diane Ring, Interim Dean of Boston College Law School. I'd like to welcome you to the Rappaport Center's kickoff program for the academic year, Reparations, Issues, Challenges, and Opportunities. I just wanted to remind you this session is being recorded. Understanding and dismantling systemic racism is critical to moving forward as a country, a commonwealth, in our communities, and right here at our law school. We have been steeped in a time of racial reckoning, which has exploded in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, but had its beginnings long before. Today's conversation on reparations will take us a step farther on this important journey of listening and learning about ways to try and achieve justice for historical wrongdoings. For the past 6 years, we've been privileged to have the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy here at Boston College. In that time, the center has brought the most esteemed scholars, practitioners, legislators, public officials, and activists together to address issues of great significance to communities and society. Today's panel continues that legacy. We are honored to have 3 of the nation's most prominent visionaries and activists in the area of reparations. We are also delighted that the program is co-sponsored by the Boston College Black Law Students Association and its co-presidents, KP Ifediba and Travis Salters, will be participating as well. Travis will be introducing our participatory moderator, Jeffery Robinson. Before I turn it over to Travis, I wanted to highlight the next few Rappaport Center programs, and I hope that you'll join us. On September 23rd, the Rappaport Center, in partnership with the Rappaport Institute at Harvard's Kennedy School, is holding a virtual debate on rent control, moderated by Tiziana Deering, host of WBUR's Radio Boston. In October, we'll hear from housing experts on zoning and equity. And in November, we'll get an up-close and in-depth view of legal issues inside the Biden presidential campaign. We're proud that one of our BC Law alums, Patrick Moore, served as Deputy General Counsel for the Biden campaign, and he, along with special guests, will be sharing what happens inside a presidential campaign. If you would like to be notified of Rappaport Center programs, please click the link in the chat to receive the newsletter or email rappaport@bc.edu. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the Rappaport Center team, Lissy Medvedal, Executive Director, Dan Canstrom, Faculty Director, and Cindy Nguyen, Administrative Assistant, for their work in bringing us such important programs, including today's. I now have the pleasure of introducing Travis Salters, co-president of BLSA here at BC Law School. Travis is a second-year law student who is originally from the Philadelphia area and spent several years in Atlanta, Georgia. He received his BA from Penn State University, majoring in journalism and African American studies with a minor in political science. At BC Law, in addition to being co-president of BLSA, he is also vice president of BC's Impact Blog. Prior to attending law school, Travis co-founded a nonprofit organization in Atlanta called Next Generation Men and Women, an organization dedicated to providing exposure and support to post-secondary pathways and careers for high school students. This work was inspired by his work with Teach for America and as a high school literature teacher in Southwest Atlanta. Travis spent this past summer with the Massachusetts Office of the Attorney General in the Administrative Law Division. Next summer, Travis will join Goodwin Procter as a summer associate. So please welcome Travis Salters.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Dean Ring. I'd like to thank the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy for including the Black Law Student Association in this incredible program. Also, thank you to all of our participants and spectators for taking the time to engage in discussion around this critical issue. And a special thanks, of course, to our moderator and panelists. Jeffery Robinson is the executive director of the Who We Are Project. Until April 2021, Mr. Robinson was a deputy legal director and the director for the ACLU Trone Center for Justice and Equality, which houses the organization's work on criminal justice, racial justice, and reform issues. Since graduating from Harvard Law School in 1981, Mr. Robinson has 3 decades of experience working on these issues. For 7 years, he represented indigent clients in state court at the Defender Association, and then in federal court at the Federal Public Defender's Office, both in Seattle. In 1988, he began a 27-year private practice at the Seattle firm of Schrader, Goldmark, and Bender, where he represented a broad range of clients in local, state, and federal courts on charges ranging from shoplifting to security fraud and even first-degree murder. He has tried over 200 criminal cases to verdict and has tried more than a dozen civil cases representing plaintiffs suing corporate and government entities. He was one of the original members of the John Adams Project and worked on behalf of one of 5 men held in Guantanamo Bay charged with carrying out the 9/11 attacks. In addition to being a nationally recognized trial attorney, Mr. Robinson is also a respected teacher of trial advocacy. He is a faculty member of the National Criminal Defense College in Macon, Georgia, and has lectured on trial skills all over the United States. He has also spoken nationally to diverse audiences on the role of race in the criminal justice system. He is past president of the Washington Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and a life member of the board of directors of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. He is also an elected fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. Thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Robinson.
I appreciate it, and thank you for that introduction. I want to say welcome to everybody. I am so pleased to be here tonight with Nkechi and Robin Roo to discuss a topic that has made it into the national discourse: reparations for the damages and harm done by the institution of slavery and its vestiges, which began as soon as the Civil War. The vestiges of that slavery, that institution, began as soon as the Civil War ended and continue until today, 56 years later. I did not come to the issue of reparations decades ago. I was certainly in the struggle for racial justice, but when I came to the ACLU, I started a conversation that ended up with our board of directors endorsing HR 40 for the first time in the history of the ACLU, and moving to work with organizations that had been in this struggle from the beginning. And that's where my association at the ACLU led me to the National African American Reparations Commission, which worked with the ACLU and other organizations to put on forums in Washington, D.C., Charleston, South Carolina, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Seattle, Washington, and in New York. We helped to organize support for testimony in front of Congress, including testimony from Japanese American activists who told their story of reparations, and the commission that was formed, which ended up giving $1.6 billion to Japanese Americans for 3.5 years of imprisonment during World War II. HR 40 is the bill that would create a commission to study the issue of reparations and to make specific legislative proposals for reparations. But HR 40 didn't appear out of nowhere. And that's where I want to go to Nkechi Taifa, our first panel, one of the 2 panelists that's going to be speaking with us today. And I want to give you a short bio of Ms. Taifa. She is a civil rights and human rights attorney and scholar activist. She's president of the Taifa Group and serves as a senior fellow for the Center of Justice at Columbia University. She's a nationally recognized commentator on issues of race and racial justice. She has worked at the Open Society Foundations, Howard University, the ACLU National Prison Project. She's a commissioner and chair of the DC Commission on Human Rights. And she is a founding member of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, named NCOBRA. And she is an inaugural commissioner of the National African American Reparations Commission. Nkechi, thank you so much for being here with us today. And that's where I think I want to start. Reparations didn't just come out of nowhere earlier this year when people started hearing about it. Could you give us a little bit of an understanding about where this struggle began and how it has gotten to where it is today?
Thank you so very much, Jeff. You know, reparations is an issue whose time has come. And you know, today is exactly 32 years after the introduction of H.R. 40 by Congressman John Conyers in 1989. And I remember the time vividly. I was an integral part of organizations and individuals that came together 2 years prior to that introduction to founding COBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And when we witnessed the successful passage of the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, which granted reparations to Japanese Americans for their unjust incarceration during World War II, we began to think strategically. That bill began with a federally chartered commission to study the issue. And we felt that if we followed the same strategy that had just been successful with the Japanese Americans, it would be sheer racism for the country to deny redress to Black people. But my personal journey began long before that. Mine actually started in the early 70s as a high school teenager selling Black Panther newspapers on the streets of Washington, D.C. And one day, after I was tired of selling, I took a break and sat down on the curb and actually opened the paper, actually read through an issue. And on the page that talked about what we want, what we believe, it was point number 3 that left an indelible mark on my mind. It said that we believe that this racist government has robbed us, and now we are demanding the overdue debt of 40 acres and 2 mules. Wow. I don't know where the 2 came from. I always heard 40 acres and mule, but sitting on the curb that day, I didn't know at that time about the massacres in Rosewood, Florida, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Wilmington, North Carolina. I didn't know about the merciless experimentation on Black women devoid of anesthesia that led to modern day gynecology. I didn't know about the enormous profits made by corporations and insurance companies and the banking and investment industries and the academic and religious institutions from slavery. But I was very passionate about injustice. I felt that the idea of reparations to be reasonable and fair, and I vowed to talk about the concept whenever and wherever I could. However, Boston College, Rappaport Center, BLSA co-chairs, Jeff, Robin, my mentor, who never even knew she was a mentor, Justice Geraldine Hines, way back when she was a lawyer with the National Conference of Black Lawyers. However, just to verbalize, folk, the word reparations was a starting point to its validity. And so talk about it, I did, despite being rejected with respect to my views, ridiculed, or otherwise summarily dismissed. So standing on that corner, little did I realize that 50 years later, I will be in the company of folk on this panel here, you know, leading academicians and historians, attorneys, psychiatrists, economists, and more, promoting the right to and the need for reparations. But the demand for reparations in the United States did not begin when I was 16 years old. The claim certainly did not drop from the sky with Ta-Nehisi Coates or with Hannah Nicole Jones, who both of whom opened up the casket for a new generation and catapulted the issue indirectly into the mainstream. There has been no time when the call for redress has not been passionately voiced. There was Belinda Royal in the 1700s petitioning for a pension from the proceeds of her former enslaved estate. There were newly freed Black people who worked closely with General Sherman in fashioning the concept of 40 acres, only to have it stripped away by Andrew Johnson. There was Callie House and Isaiah Dickinson in the late 1800s who founded the first mass-based reparations movement, the National Ex-Slave Mutual Bounty and Pension Association, demanding compensation from federal agencies. There was Marcus Garvey in the early part of the 20th century, one of his followers who became known as Queen Mother Audley Moore, who kept the issue alive her entire life, sparking what I call the modern era reparations movement, influencing the Nation of Islam, influencing James Foreman and Dr. Martin Luther King from the Civil Rights Movement, influencing the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, the National Black United Front, Congressman John Conyers, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations, the National African American Reparations Commission, the Movement for Black Lives, and countless others. And I was influenced by Jeff, and I became a part of many of these movements. But the demand for reparations has been very long and it's been continuous. And I submit, as I'm coming to a close, that the reparations in this country essentially constitutes 4 elements. Number 1, the formal acknowledgement of historic wrong and an official unfettered apology. Number 2, the recognition that the injury has continued throughout the years and still manifests today. Number 3, the commitment to redress by the federal government, which sanctioned the enslavement and subsequent vestiges, and by states, corporations, industries, academic and religious institutions, and private estates, which enjoyed unjust enrichment from the area. And then number 4, the actual compensation in whatever form or forms are agreed upon. And as I'm constantly reminded by my colleague Kim Howard, reparations must also be accompanied by the internationally accepted norms of cessation, meaning stop it, and guarantees of non-repetition, restitution, compensation, satisfaction, and rehabilitation. So I'm no longer an isolated entity out there talking about reparations. The issue is no longer on the fringes. We have the ACLU, we have Human Rights Watch, we have National Council of Churches, we have the NAACP, we have the National U.S. Conference of Mayors, we have Amalgamated Bank, we have the Athletic Players Association. We got even Ben and Jerry's ice cream, which has issued a call for corporations to be vocal. My heart is full. There is unquestionably a racial reckoning in this country, in this day, at this time. The winds of change are shifting in support of reparations. The casket is being thrust wide open. Reparations is not history. It's not a thing of the past, but it is about historical justice. And until justice is done, it will always be part of my journey.
And Nkechi, I appreciate that so much. And just as I was listening and you were talking about the kind of recognition of 40 acres and a mule and how that was taken away under President Andrew Johnson, I think many people don't realize that in January of 1865, the North knew they were going to win the war. And they held secret meetings with freed Black men in Savannah, Georgia in January. And the 67-year-old Black minister who was the spokesperson for that group was asked a question: what will it take for Black people to make it once you become free? And we know the questions and the answers because since they thought they were doing something important, they wrote it down. And the answer that was given was, give us land and we'll work it with the women, the children, and the old men, because the young men are going to go into service for the government. And General William Sherman was in that meeting. And 4 days later, he was so impressed by what they said that he entered Special Field Order 15, which many people recognize as 40 acres and a mule. So the history there about that power is just really, really significant. And I want to switch to a minute and go to our other panelist, Roo Simmons, who is the founder and executive director of FirstRepair. That's a new not-for-profit organization that advocates for local reparations nationally. She served as the 5th Ward Alderman in Evanston from 2017 to 2021, where she led, in collaboration with others, the passage of the nation's first municipal funded reparations legislation, first in the nation. The Local Reparations Initiative will be funded by, and I just love this, the first $10 million of adult marijuana use. That's where they're getting the money. And Robin, I want to come to you and just say that local reparations for a small community or a city in America, no one had kind of been talking about that. And so did you roll out of bed one morning and say reparations in Evanston? How did this come about?
Thank you, Jeff. I just want to say I'm so excited to be here, and coming after my sister mentor Nkechi Taifa is obviously very difficult, but it's an honor to do so. I, grew up in a racially segregated community in Evanston, Illinois, and the Fifth Ward is a community that I still live in today, and it still is racially segregated. I experienced personally, I have lived expertise in the barriers to accessing opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities, capital, home ownership. I lived through with my family and community the challenges and the barriers, the vestiges that we talk about often in reparations of the enslavement. And so in my commitment to empowering the Black community through business, through advocacy, through appointments at the city council, and later as a city council member, I saw that we had a lot of work to do. We could not continue in the path of ordinary public policy. That in my legislative role, I saw all that we had done as a community. We'd had the honorific ceremonies and resolutions and street namings, and we've done a lot of that satisfaction as we talk about in full repair reparations. But still, in our city, we had a $46,000 household income divide between Black and white Evanston. And this is a community that celebrates our diversity and our inclusion. We're known for that. People move here for that. But yet we have these racial inequalities that are sustained year after year and not addressed through our policy. And I, like you, Jeff, I haven't fought for reparations for decades. I have been a supporter of HR 40 naturally since I was a young adult. But I came into public office believing I could do good equity work, more, smart governance to bridge our racial divides and empower the Black community. And very quickly, I saw that more of the same would only sustain the divide that we had, and that reparations was the most appropriate legislative response to the specific injuries in Evanston. Now, I was leading within my purview. I'm a local elected. This was not to respond to the crimes against our humanity as we know it as a slave trade here in America. This was specific to what did Evanston do? What policies specifically in Evanston have kept us racially segregated, financially segregated, have kept us oppressed? And with a case for reparations in Evanston, we uncovered that there were specific housing policies and zoning laws that were passed in 1919 and enforced until fair housing was passed in 1968. Later in 1969, we outlawed those practices that keep us segregated today. So we came up with a specific approach to address specific injuries and harms in Evanston to begin the road to repair in Evanston. And that took a legislative process. It took understanding our community assets and partners. It took the stakeholder community, the Black community, weighing in and prioritizing what forms of reparations did we want to see. It took a strong legislative leader that was crazy enough to say local reparations when it was unprecedented. And it took the partnership of important institutions like NCOBRA, which I'm proud now to be on the Legislative Commission and a lifetime member, like NARC, where I'm proud to be a commissioner, like the support of the incredible Nkechi Taifa and Jeff Robinson and others, so many others, the Redress Network, the African American Redress Network, and the commitment from Columbia and Howard Law Schools. So it took that sort of support and then a legislative process. In Evanston, we have a city manager form of government. We're a home rule municipality. So it was up to me to map out a viable path to pass a funded legislation that actually could bring repair and not be more ceremony. And so we did that through committees. We have a commission that appropriately worked on this. The Equity and Empowerment Commission led our community through a process where we heard from them. And ultimately, our Reparations Committee came up with our first policy that was directed by the Black community. The Black community gave feedback and housing rose up as a priority. And so we've moved forward through a 2-year legislative process that I was very fortunate to take lead in collaboration with so many others. And so that's how we got to local reparations. It really was not looking to respond to or replace HR 40 for sure. I should note that our city in 2002 supported HR 40 by resolution led by Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste, and our city stands in strong support of HR 40 passing today. But it was appropriate that we take our next step. We show our commitment through legislation, through funding, and maybe be an example to other cities in the nation and show our true commitment to HR 40 by taking our first small local step.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Robin, I want to come back to you on this issue of local reparations versus national reparations in just a minute. But Nkechi, when I was at the ACLU and our organization decided to get involved in the fight for HR 40, as opposed to the ACLU kind of stepping out and using our own messaging and saying what we thought, we came to NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, and tried to learn what was happening, what were the kind of fundamental things behind this movement, and then tried to support that movement. Robin just said that there were members of the Black community who were involved in deciding what form reparations should take. Is there a need for impacted people to be represented on a commission that Congress would put together to study this issue and come up with proposals? And if that is necessary, why is it so necessary?
It absolutely is necessary. I mean, many times we criticize government and entities for not involving directly impacted people, not having people with direct lived experiences at the table. But HR 40 has a process where there is, in fact, representation from folk who have been involved in this issue for longstanding periods of time. And that's one of the beauties about HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans. This isn't something that is just going to come from a hive, from historically white institution, class-based and the like, but to embody people who have been out there doing the work. So absolutely, it is critical, it is important, and it is a part of HR 40.
I am wondering, there is a lot of discussion about reparations going on, Nkechi, and do you relate, I know that you were involved in working with Japanese American activists who ended up testifying in front of Congress in support of HR 40. And one issue is, well, what if there are different voices in the Black community? Some who think it should be this way and some who think it should be this other way. Were there things that you and other commissioners were able to learn from the Japanese American experience about how those differences get resolved and whether those differences mean you should just stop the process? If Blacks can't agree on it, then don't even have HR 40. If the Japanese Americans are in disagreement, don't even pay reparations.
Well, I think one of the things that's critical to understand is that no group is monolithic. There are differences all the way across the board. It was differences within the Japanese American community, which I found out through collaboration with them, even just more so recently. And there were differences even when HR 40 was first being discussed and debated about. There were those of us in the community, in the Black Power community, who basically were saying, we don't need a commission. We don't need to study this issue. I mean, we already know what the situation is. So there was discussion and there was debate and there was strategy. And it was finally determined, again, that we would follow a route that was tried and proven, which was the Japanese American route. So we should not be daunted that there are differences. Differences will happen all the time. But what is important is that we come together and at least allow the least common denominator, which at this point is a commission, to come together, brilliant minds from across the country to come together and determine not just what Nkechi thinks or what Jeff thinks or what Robin thinks, but to determine what the experts as a body think as a result of this federally chartered commission. So there will be disagreements. That's why we open up the process to town halls and to discussions and to truth telling and all those things that the Japanese Americans did, in fact, do. We are learning from their process. Many of them didn't want to speak out, at first. Okay. But once the process was there, it basically opened up the floodgates. So.
One of the things that we had hoped to do in this presentation was to have a number of different voices that could talk about this issue. And there is a Dr. William Darity and Kristen Mullen, a married couple. They are both widely known in the reparations movement. They have written about it. And I know that our sponsors for this program invited Dr. Darity to appear with us. And when I heard he was going to appear with us, that he had accepted, I was really excited to get his views and to kind of have a back and forth. As I understand it, Dr. Darity got reluctant and asked if his wife, Kristen Mullen, could join him on the panel. And the folks at Boston College said, great, please, both of you come and let's have this discussion. And I'm disappointed that they decided to withdraw. They changed their minds. And I think the issue that I want to get to is, even though they decided not to come, they have written extensively on this issue. And I want to bring some of their thoughts into the discussion so that we can try, even though we don't have them here, we can quote exactly what they have said and then ask and see if we can have a discussion about it. And Robin, I want to go back to you initially with this, because I want to read you this quote. And this is a quote from Dr. Darity. I think what we have to do is, despite good intentions, move away from thinking about reparations as something that can be conducted on a state or local level. It simply can't. It has to be a federal project. And then, referring directly to Evanston, he says, that's a good step for the city to take, but let's be clear. This is a housing voucher program, not reparations. And calling it that does more harm than good. Robin, can reparations only be done by the federal government? That seems to be what Dr. Darity is saying. How do you respond to that? You're muted. Famous words on Zoom meetings.
Right. My apologies. You know what? I'm going to respond actually with a definition that I appreciate from Laying the Foundation for Local Reparations, written by Cam Howard. Reparations are an action and resource specifically directed, targeted toward repairing injuries from past and ongoing crimes against our humanity, no matter how large or small. And so with that, we have evidence of egregious acts in Evanston, specifically, other localities, not just Evanston. There are other localities that have taken their next step. Let's look at the case of reparations for Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that massacre there. The conditions in Detroit and Chicago, even Amherst, Massachusetts has begun its road to repair. So it does not preclude the work that is overdue and needed at a national level, and the work for that we are hopeful for in HR 40. But it is an appropriate step for localities to address the specific incidents and actions that they have delivered in the Black communities, and it is in fact reparations. And in terms of it being a housing voucher only, it is repair, it is reparations, it is redress, it is a remedy to a specific harm. A housing policy and zoning law that was passed and enforced in 1919. And it is in direct correlation to that injury. And therefore, it is compensation. Specifically in Evanston, it's a $25,000 direct housing benefit to build wealth instantly. Residents that are eligible will receive $25,000 of housing equity, which translates into wealth under any circumstances. housing equity is the most likely path to building wealth for all families, not just the Black community. It will allow access to home ownership. It will allow Black homeowners to sustain and keep and improve their homes. That wealth can be multiplied, enjoy as equity pulled out for whatever reason, or just begin to build legacy. So it's very narrowly focused and tailored to what's happened in Evanston. And every city should be taking those next steps. Other cities may have a case more related to health or education or over policing. Most cities are going to have all of the above, but a local case has to be developed. That's what's happened with the support of Shorefront Legacy Center, Dino Robinson taking lead there, and further support with the Redress Network on helping us build out our local case and develop an impact study in Evanston for local reparations.
And I think that as we think about local reparations, reparations on the state level, reparations on the national level, just to talk about housing for a minute, I hope that people realize, and when we're talking about the vestiges of slavery, that which came after slavery, the Federal Housing Authority drew red line maps of every major city in America. And from 1932 to 1964, white Americans got 98% of federal loans to buy homes. That is telling you something. State, federal, and local governments were involved in enforcing these discriminatory practices, the practices that were the vestiges of slavery. And it would seem that having state, federal, and local governments address their wrongdoing is the only way that we're going to actually get to a real kind of form of reparations that can actually address the level of harm that's occurred in this country on this issue. You talked about home ownership and how that is critical in terms of wealth in America, building generational wealth. Owning one's home, the home is probably, for about 98% of Americans, their home is the largest asset in their net worth. This is the thing that lets you take out a mortgage to send your kid to college, take out a mortgage to help your kid make that first down payment on their new house, all the kind of things that let families transfer generational wealth. And Nkechi, as we're talking about the wealth gap, I want to read to you another quote that comes from Dr. Darity. And one of the ways that he criticizes HR 40 is to say, HR 40 or any reparations bill must target the racial wealth gap, now approaching a difference of $850,000 in net worth between average Black and white households. Elimination of that gap will require a federal expenditure of $10 to $12 trillion mandated by Congress. The racial wealth gap has to be addressed. And Dr. Darity has suggested that HR 40 doesn't address that racial wealth gap. Is that a fair critique?
Absolutely not. HR 40 directly addresses this issue. Indeed, the findings section explicitly states that Congress finds that as a result of continued and historical discrimination, that Blacks, African Americans continue to suffer debilitating economic, education, health hardships, and it goes on. Economics, the wealth gap is definitely in there, but moreover, HR 40 is not just a study bill, it's a remedy bill as well. The proposal talks about the act establishing a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for the lingering impacts. Economics is all part and parcel of that, but even more critical is that HR 40 is not just limited to closing the Black-white wealth gap. It not only focuses on that, as it should, but it also encompasses other areas of injury as well. You see, the harms from the enslavement era were multifaceted. Thus, the remedies must be multifaceted as well. Fixing the white-Black wealth gap must not be the only remedy that people look at or people seek as part of a reparations settlement? What about the transgenerational trauma embedded in our genes as a result of the terrorism inflicted against African descendant people down to this day? Again, the harms were multifaceted. The remedies must be multifaceted as well. The culpable parties were multifaceted. The remedies must be as well. And I will also add, if I can, while I do wholeheartedly believe that cash payments should be an important and necessary component of any claim for damages, a reparations settlement can be fashioned in as many ways as necessary to equitably address the countless manifestations of injury sustained from chattel slavery and its continued vestiges. Some other forms, in addition to closing the Black-white wealth gap, could include land, economic development, of repatriation resources, truthful textbooks. Still others might encompass the erection of monuments and museums, or clemencies and pardons for political prisoners from the COINTELPRO era, repairing the harms from the war on drugs that go beyond basic public policy. We must not just tinker with just one area or one claim. It ain't just about the Black-white wealth gap, but it's about all the SHIT, about all of the mess. We gotta continuously open up the casket, all of the caskets that are out there.
I think that it's important for folks to kind of put into perspective. Slavery did not end in 1865, because the 13th Amendment said we are preserving slavery for anyone convicted of a crime. But when we talk about the vestiges of slavery, we're talking about things like separate but equal, which was the law of the land for 85 years after the Civil War ended. We're talking about lynchings against Blacks in America. For 80 years after the Civil War ended, America lynched, on average, more than one Black person every week. Let that statistic sit for a minute. So we're talking lynchings, we're talking redlining, we're talking separate but equal, we're talking discrimination by labor unions, we're talking housing discrimination, we're talking all kinds of vestiges that came from the concept that Black people are not the equals of white Americans that followed the Civil War. And when you talk about the wealth gap, you quoted a couple things, but I just want to say, from the bill, so someone who says this bill doesn't address the wealth gap, one of the findings, as you said, African Americans continue to suffer debilitating economic, educational, and health hardships, an average of less than 1/16 of the wealth of white families. That's in the findings. In the purpose of this act is to establish a commission to study and develop reparations proposals, including to battle the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery and the discrimination against African Americans. And then finally, in the establishments and duties, it's saying we have to come up with remedies for what we found in the findings and purpose. So while Dr. Darity suggests that we should just say it's $3 trillion or whatever $1 trillion figure that he put out there, HR 40 doesn't say this is the cost of reparations. It says reparations will have a cost, and we need a commission to establish exactly what that is. So I think as you're thinking about, does HR 40 address the wealth gap? Those are important things to keep in mind. Robin, I would like to ask you about another critique that some, Dr. Darity and others have made about HR 40, and that is to write into the law who is eligible for reparations. And Dr. Darity's belief is that Black Americans with at least one ancestor enslaved in the United States are the only eligible recipients. That's a lineage standard. And then he says, for at least 12 years prior to the enactment of a reparations plan or study commission, the people have identified as Black, Negro, or African American. And then he says it's going to take $10 to $12 million from Congress. Should the issue of who gets reparations be written into HR 40, into the bill, or is that something that the commission should decide?
So much like, my experience in working on reparations at a local level, the commission, who represents the injured community, experts, together should be thinking about and prioritizing who should qualify, eligibility, what those remedies are. And so I take the position that the next step is urgency in passing HR 40 so that commission can be seated, the work can happen, and those decisions can be determined by the commission and later implemented.
Nkechi, I want to come to you on this issue because I have talked with you about this before. And can you weigh in on the difference between writing something into the legislation versus having an expert commission decide how the reparations will actually be structured?
It is absolutely critical that this be the province of a commission of experts, and not just one person out there, no matter how expert that one person is or might think they are. I think I'm an expert. I would not be the one to say what is or is not to happen. Of course, I have my views, but my views are to be shared with others, and that parlay, back and forth. And there might be some give and take. I might come along to your way of thinking, or you might come along to my way of thinking. But it's not just a situation wherein it has to be mandated that this is what it has to be before the commission is even established. And when you talk about that identity issue, that lineage issue, I think that is a prime case. That is an area because it's messy. It's messy. And it's not just one person to give their opinion or their belief. I personally don't feel that reliance on an identity standard makes sense, or that requirement of proof, basically, in my humble opinion, flies in the face of the historic reality that is out there. And I have personal examples to give. And if I come before the commission as part of a town hall and give my story, I would like that listened to, just as others who have their feelings is that, well, there needs to be a DNA test, or you need to open up the genealogical records or whatever. There are other opinions. And there are many experts out there with different ideas as to just what the situation scenario should be. So.
And I just remember from conversations that we have had both together and with Japanese American activists, how many of them were saying, you wouldn't believe how many different opinions there were on how this should go. And what those Japanese American activists ended up telling us is that the process of the commission gave them a vehicle to voice these concerns before the entire country. And that in itself was part of a repair that they weren't even anticipating would come. So I think as you, for our audience, as you are hearing things about HR 40 and what it should or shouldn't entail, keep in mind how broad this issue is, how difficult it is, and how it is going to take great minds from all kinds of areas of study in America to get this right. And, the one thing I would say is America has never said, we are going to go to the greatest minds in this country and give them one task: come up with a program of reparations that will make a difference in the lives of Black Americans, and by extension in the lives of all Americans, in terms of bringing our country closer to the ideals that we expressed. We have never gone to a group of experts and said, come up with a program to do that. And if we did, people who talk about American exceptionalism and how we have such great minds here, I actually believe some of that. And I believe that if we ask the question and then listen to what people say, we will get solutions of all kinds, solutions, quite frankly, that you, Robin, and I have never even dreamed of, because we don't have the expertise in a certain area that somebody else might come with. And so I want to talk about this commission for a minute, because one of the things that, and as I said before, I do wish that Dr. Darity were here so that we could discuss this with him or others who hold these views. But one of the things that he has said is that the current HR 40 increased the number of commissioners to 13. 6 additional members would be selected from the major civil society and reparations organizations that have historically championed the cause of reparatory justice. Dr. Darity says it is transparent that NAARC and NCOBRA and its allies wrote themselves into significant representation on the commission. I'm going to go to Robin first and then come back to you, Nkechi. So are NARC and NCOBRA trying to take over this commission by insisting that people who come from organizations who have worked on this issue for a long time be included?
Well, I'll say that NCOBRA, as mentioned, is a 34-year-old organization that has a history of 34 years of advocating, pushing for, advancing HR 40 and local initiatives. So it is appropriate that that institution, representation from that institution be included, in my opinion, be included in the commission and thinking about reparations here in the United States. I disagree that there is any attempt to take over the reparations movement or HR 40. I've seen inclusion. I have seen attempts for coalition building and collaboration among both organizations. But I do think that, as mentioned, it's important that the injured community and experts, advocates, folks that have been paying very close attention, very educated and familiar with reparations are a part of this commission. And it's yet to be seated.
Nkechi, I want to come to you. What about this issue? Is it unfair for organizations who have been around for more than 2 decades to be represented on this commission?
Absolutely not. As I said before, those who are directly impacted or have experienced the trauma and the history need to be those who are at the table and need to be ensured that they are at the table as well. And HR 40 does that. But even more over than that, the commission will have the power to bring in any and every expert needed who have extensively studied the issues of injury and the various areas of repair. And an economist, for example, will look at the issue through the lens of economics, an educator from the lens of education, a psychiatrist through those lens. The power of the commission is vast and will bring in any and everybody that's necessary to help the commission to make those decisions. But again, I think it is the beauty of this commission that it is ensuring that those who are most impacted, i.e. the communities most impacted, are there and have a voice. And I've heard lots of people talking about they have been longstanding in the reparations movement. So I don't know why this even, an issue. Dr. Darity himself has talked about his longstanding connection to the issue. So I'm kind of incredulous that is even a point of contention.
I want to add something, Jeff.
Please go right ahead.
I believe that these organizations best represent the people. And so I would want an organization that has been in touch at a grassroots level, engaged with initiatives that are in action right now, having a seat at the table and thinking about and influencing the goals and the actions of HR 40. So I would have peace of mind knowing that those not just in academic spaces or not just economists or certain experts, but those that also have connections to the neighborhoods, the Black clubs, those voices that are too often excluded from these tables of decision making and policy making would be represented through these organizations. And that's been our local experience. I know we're very hyper local and it's so minimal compared to the goals of HR 40. But, we had a process. I could have used my automatic privilege to take it straight to a special order of business and fight a compelling argument and pass reparations. but it was appropriate that it went through stages and processes that had a lot of participation from the community, starting with a commission, going to a committee, later going to city council, allowing for vast inclusion and many stakeholder voices to be included in our process and decisions.
I want to go to one last critique of HR 40, because unfortunately, as I said, we didn't have Dr. Darity and Kristen Mullen here with us, but we wanted to try and talk about the issues that have been raised as people have discussed HR 40. And this is one of the other things that Dr. Darity has said. He actually gave testimony on HR 40. And he said, in my testimony on HR 40, I argued that the starting date for the accounting of atrocities should be the formation of the Republic in 1776 rather than 1619, which is when the first enslaved people, at least documentation of 20 and odd enslaved people landing in Virginia. The United States of America did not exist prior to 1776. Cobra now makes a bizarre argument that the 13 colonies that formed the United States were corporations subjected to the hostile takeover by rebels against the crown. But to the extent that the corporate analogy has any relevance, the pre-1776 corporate entity was not the colonies themselves. It was the colonial powers that established and maintained them. Eventually, solely the United Kingdom. Any bill for the period of 1619 to 1776 should go to the former colonial powers rather than being charged to the US government. Nkechi and Robin, would you mind if I step slightly out of my moderator role and give my view on this? Because this is something that I have focused on a lot and have thought about continually. The Who We Are project is all about telling the true history of America's experience with white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And one of the things that lets us know what our history truly is a human trait that has existed since the time human beings existed. So I'm talking about a trait that has existed before there was written language. If any of you like music from the 70s, you may remember a band called Steely Dan. And they had a song called The Caves of Altamira. And the lyrics went like this: before the fall, when they wrote it on the wall, when there wasn't even any Hollywood, they heard the call and they wrote it on the wall. What they're saying about those cave drawings is that those drawings represent people writing things down about what was important to them. When you see those drawings of animals, they're not just pretty. They were drawing those animals so that their children could understand, how do we live? What is it that we hunt? When you see the footprints of the animals and the scat of the animals, how do we find the animals? When you see pictures of people killing the animals, this is how we survive. When human beings think they're doing something important, they write stuff down. And in 1776, after the revolution, when the colonies were coming together, they had 171 years from 1619 to 1776, enriching themselves on enslaving people and getting unpaid labor from those people. And when the Constitutional Convention happened, slavery was on the table, right in the middle of the table. People remember Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Well, here's what Patrick Henry had to say about Blacks in America at the Constitutional Convention. There are 236,000 Blacks in Virginia, but few or none in the northern states. And so when you think about the 3/5 clause to the Constitution, counting each Black person as 3/5 of a human being, what did that do? It gave the South extra members in Congress and extra votes in the Electoral College. The Constitution protected the transatlantic slave trade, saying no state can make a law outlawing it until 1808. They then doubled down on that and said, we know no state can make a law stopping the transatlantic slave trade because Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution prevents it. But what if somebody tries to amend the Constitution? So in Article 5 of the Constitution, they said, you can't amend Article 1, Section 9 until 1808. And Article 4 of the Constitution literally made Black people's attempts to be free unconstitutional. So when America put slavery on the table at the Constitutional Convention, this wasn't something about, oh, that's what we did in the colonies and we're different here. They doubled down on it. And by doubling down, they took the wealth and the riches, not that England got, but that the colonies got from enslaving people, and took that wealth and those riches, and they made the United States of America. It's important to remember, HR 40 is not a lawsuit. Issues, and I think Nkobra's position on corporate structure is really interesting, but even to me, you don't even have to go there. We're talking about moral, historic, accurate descriptions of what the colonies did when they formed our country and what they did going forward. And there is no distinction between the quote unquote British colonist on one day and then the very next day, they're American citizens. And I guess the last thing I'll say on this topic, and I go back to Michael K. Williams, the actor that just passed away, rest in peace, rest in power, appeared on a program called The Wire, a program that captured the fascination and the interest of many Americans. And there's a quote from another character in that show that I think answers this question about 1619 versus 1776. A character who was called D'Angelo Barksdale. And this is what he had to say. You can say you somebody new, you can give yourself a whole new story. But what came first is who you really are. And what happened before is what really happened. Let's not be making excuses for America. America has demonstrated its greatness again and again and again. And America has been one of the most racist countries on the face of the earth. Those two things happen together because human beings are not just one thing. And if human beings aren't just one thing, everybody in this audience knows you have been a saint and you have been a sinner at some point in your life. If human beings aren't just one thing, then countries aren't just one thing. So let's not get tied up in technicalities about responsibility when the history shows us exactly what America did in its colonial stage and in its constitutional stage. And when it came to anti-Black racism, to quote another band of mine, The Who, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So I think that critique of HR 40 is simply not well taken. We have had a discussion on a lot of aspects of HR 40, and I want to make sure that we leave time for the folks who are in our audience to ask questions and to see if Nkechi and Robin can give some input on or some answers to those questions, give some information that will be helpful to folks who are listening. So Lizzie, could you maybe just start throwing some questions at us?
Actually, what I'm going to do is introduce the co-president of BLSA, who will handle the questions. So
excellent.
First, I want to say we could continue this conversation for so much longer, but as you said, Jeff, we promised we would do a Q&A. So let me introduce KP Ifediba, as I said, co-president of BLSA and a second-year student. He's kindly agreed to do the Q&A for us. KP, as well as being co-chair, co-president of BLSA, is part of Lahanas in the Business Law Society here at BC Law. Prior to law school, he worked as a paralegal and a legal assistant in Birmingham, Alabama. He's a graduate of the University of Alabama, where he focused on economics and finance. For the past 2 years, he has served as a mentor for the Big Brother, Big Sister program, as well as serving on its youth advisory board. Last summer, KP worked at Nutter, McLennan and Fish, and has let me know that he will be joining the firm of Mayor Brown in New York as a summer associate this coming year. You can find KP's full bio, as well, everyone, as the full bios of all our esteemed panelists in the chat. So KP, take it away.
Thank you, Lissy, for the very generous introduction. You know, I want to thank all
KP,
of our.
before you start, I just have to say, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, so I can't say Roll Tide, but I'm thrilled that you're doing this for us.
Understood. I can't say Rocky Top or anything like that. I'd like to thank all of our distinguished panelists for coming today and joining this conversation. I think that, you know, my personal excitement is only echoed by the excitement of the attendees, and we've saved some time for question and answer. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor for any questions. Please type your questions into the Q&A, and we will I'll field them there. We have one from Ms. Catherine Young. She says, "Fabulous panel, thank you. Can I ask the panel how much NAARC and others have found international experiences with reconciliation and reparations after state-based violence and human rights abuses?"
Nkechi, I want to throw that one to you, because you and Cam I've heard you and Cam Howard have conversations on this, and I just kind of sit there like this.
Okay, no, so I just want to say that the reparations movement is an international movement. I want to make sure that that is clear. And the formation actually of NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, was inspired by the CARICOM, the Community of Caribbean Nations, and their reparations platform and their 10-point program for reparations from their former European colonialists. And we work very closely with CARICOM. We work very closely with reparations movements in Europe and in South America and the Caribbean, you know, and the like. And it is a global movement, okay? And we have global issues. Some of the issues are similar and some of them are distinctive, but the important thing is that we kind of work together as a part of that. The body of international law has been growing and developing. When I first started working on this issue way back in the day, there was not a body of reparations law. You know, there was the situation with the Jews and the Holocaust in Germany and the like. But since that time, there's been a lot of codification, and those 5 areas of cessation and guarantees of non-repetition and restitution and satisfaction and et cetera, that comes out of that newer body of international law, which we are all in the process of digesting and relating to our specific circumstances here in the United States.
Thank you. That's a great answer. We have a question from an anonymous attendee as well. How should the voices of those incarcerated and their families be included in the reparations conversation?
Robin, I'll throw that to you if you have some ideas, and I may have some too.
I do, but Nkechi focuses on this very intently, so I'm going to ask that Nkechi respond.
So what I would like to do, Brother KP, is also coordinate that with the question that is in the chat as well about this being the 50th anniversary of the start of the Attica movement and how folk feel about enslaved Black bodies and years of Black life lost to jails, prisons, and executions. I want to kind of give some views globally on both of those. One thing that's important to reiterate is that reparations is more than just basic public policy, which should be happening anyway. That's something more, that's something specific, like what Robin and her constituents did in Evanston, specifically tied to the enslavement era. But there are so many correlations between issues dealing with mass incarceration and police murders that directly relate back to the enslavement era and its vestiges. It was marked that this was the 50th anniversary. Actually, today, September 9th, actually to this day marks the 50th anniversary of this uprising in upstate New York, where the prisoners were basically talking about basic human rights, health care, sanitation, food, medical care, just basic things that we are still facing today. And that emanated from way back in the enslavement time, because the prisons were simply an extension of the era of enslavement that had passed. And yes, incarcerated people should be part of who is at the table. For those who don't know, the last provision of the Japanese American Redress Bill, in addition to granting cash payments, in addition to setting up an educational trust fund, in addition to the official policy, was a pardon for all those who resisted detention, camp, internment. And what am I talking about? We're talking about issues of pardon and clemencies today. We're talking about over incarceration, hyper incarceration. We have people who resisted the war of terrorism, of genocide that's been waged against Black people, who are still languishing in prison back from the 60s and from the 70s. So all that can, Brother KP, be part of a reparations settlement. Again, if I were to testify before a commission, I would definitely make that recommendation. But again, it's not for me to say, it's for me to bring forth this evidence, this information, and let the body of experts that are part of the commission determine, okay, well, that is valid. That might not be quite as valid. Yes, we will incorporate that. Oh, we hear what you're saying. So it's part of bringing all of this information to the fore and let the commission determine just what the actual remedy or remedies will be.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to add just one thing to that, or a couple things to that, because I've been a lawyer for 40 years. I spent the last 6 years at the ACLU, but for 34 years, I was a criminal defense lawyer. And it is so important to recognize that slavery did not end in 1865. The 13th Amendment preserved it for anyone convicted of a crime. And when you start doing the history, that's why we talk about the vestiges of slavery. This didn't end in 1865. As soon as the Civil War was over, Black people started to be arrested for all sorts of crimes like vagrancy. In the state of Alabama, the Black prison population in 1850 was 3 or 4%. In 1870, it was almost 78% or 75% in that area. What happened after 1865 is that the criminal laws were used to keep Black people as close to the condition of slavery as was possible. And the convict leasing system that literally, in 1866, you get arrested for a crime in Mississippi, you'd be put in jail. And then the city that ran the jail would lease you out to the very plantation where you were enslaved, where you would do the exact same work and still not get paid for it. Now, this time the plantation owner had to pay something, but they paid it to the city, not to the people doing the work. So it's important to understand how the vestiges of slavery, which were designed to keep Black people as close to that condition as possible, ran through so many different areas. So think about this when we're talking about the criminal legal system. People, mostly white Americans, are making millions of dollars right now selling weed legally. And one of the biggest weed shops in Seattle is called Uncle Ike's on the corner of 23rd and Union. And if you took a circle and drew a circle around the corner of 23rd and Union about 2 miles wide, I have no idea how many people, how many Black people you would find in that circle that can't own an Uncle Ike's because they got a marijuana conviction. Think about that. And so when you think about how the criminal legal system has taken behaviors and criminalized them for one community, but not for another, you start to understand how clemency, pardons, those things have to be part of any comprehensive reparations package, because the criminal legal system has been used as a tool to suppress and prevent Black freedom and advancement in this country. And there are just examples of that in every state in America, in every 10-year period from 1865 up to and including today.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I think Daniel Canstrom had a follow-up to our first question about the NARCP.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to weigh in a bit and first of all, to thank you all for this fantastic, enlightening panel. I've learned so much and I'm truly inspired by everything I've heard. And I don't have time to explain in detail exactly why. Although, Jeffrey, I will say, you and I may be the last two people standing who can drop casual references to Steely Dan in a conference like this without getting into trouble. I know I couldn't do it, but I'm glad to hear that you could do it. I had a question that followed up from Katie Young's question, and this is also related to something that Nkechi was talking about, which is the international model. And as I'm sure you all know, the Germans put in place a really, really huge program of reparations. They called it Wiedergutmachung, to make things right again. And that included not only money payments, which are still continuing to a lot of people, but also included various programs of societal reform, including, I think, outlawing the Nazi Party and denazification efforts and so forth. And it's always struck me that, one of the dangers, and again, I have no doubt that you are much more aware of this than I am, but one of the dangers of a reparation conversation is the idea that you get to a point where, all right, now we got the 40 acres and a mule, now the work is done. And of course, none of us think that's even possible. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how the process of the HR 40 or some of these other processes fulfill this idea of an ongoing commitment to reparations as related to a societal reform agenda, and what ideas you may have about the, the best pieces of that going forward.
Robin or Nkechi, I would love to throw to either of you, and I have a couple ideas, but you're muted. You're muted.
I was just saying, let the church say amen to you, Jeff, and you go on and roll with that one and start out.
Well, I think Daniel, as I seeing you like make the gesture of like washing your hands, and I understand that, and it's a powerful issue, because people, especially people today in the society that we live in with 8-second attention spans and things like that, it's like, I want the problem to be over. I want it to go away, and I want a quick solution to fix everything so I don't have to think about it anymore. And I think the thing that's important to understand is that it took us 400 years, 402 years to be exact, from 1619 until today, to get to this place. It's going to take a minute to unwind it. And if you try and unwind it in one fell swoop, you will fail. I don't say that, I will say that's my opinion, but that's an opinion where I would say we both can't be wrong, so I must be right. That is an opinion, in my view, that is simply absolutely true. And we have a multiple century laboratory experiment of what will happen if we try and make a few changes and say we fixed the problem. For example, passing a law that says police can't choke a person when they're arresting them. Many people feel like, well, that's the answer to George Floyd and what happened in Minnesota. And that's not even a Band-Aid. Passing a law that says police can't choke somebody will not fix the problem of police accountability and police violence in Black communities. It is more complicated than that. And so the beauty of HR 40, in my view, is having this expert commission who can say, we've listened to all kinds of experts, to all kinds of impacted people. We have heard all kinds of opinions. Here is a list of legislative proposals that can address the problems that people have been concerned about. But addressing those problems in the first instance, it doesn't mean that there won't need to be more legislation or more action that comes after that. There has never been a program, a national program in America that hasn't been tinkered with from time to time. And it's insane to think that you will come up with the absolute perfect proposal in one fell swoop. So I think this is a process. The reparations movement is a process, and it is a multi-year process. Probably, if I'm being accurate, it's a multi-decade process. And so believe me, I would love to be at the point where I can wash my hands and say, I can now do something different. I can focus on something different. But we aren't there. And trying to short circuit the process only ensures that 20 years from now, Boston College will be having another panel, just like this one. And I won't be on it because I'll probably be dead. Nkechi will live forever. Robin is young, so they may be on it. But I'm not interested in another panel like this 20 years down the road, unless it is a panel saying, this is what we've done, this is how far we've come, and this is how far we need to go. That kind of panel, I'll come back from my grave for. But the other kind of panel saying, well, we made a little progress and thought we had fixed it and walked away, and now we come back and see we didn't fix it at all. That's something that we just can't afford.
Well, if I'm still on the faculty, then I'll organize that panel, and I hope we don't have to get you out of the grave to come back.
And I would say, Daniel, I really appreciate that question also. And of course, Jeffrey, I always, appreciate your responses. I just want to reiterate also and make sure that folks really, really understand this concept that the harms and the injuries from the enslavement era and its continuing vestiges, they were multifaceted. It was not just one thing. It's not just closing the wealth gap and everything is fine. They were multifaceted. The harms were multifaceted. The culpable parties were multifaceted. Federal government, state government, academic institutions, religious institutions, industry, corporations, and yes, even private estates. So the accountability from those culpable parties must be multifaceted as well. And, these are just kind of like words, but until, like I said, we begin speaking these words, okay, we never know the whole gamut of what's on the table to be resolved. So I appreciate that question that you raised.
I appreciate the question as well. I know that we have a few more minutes. I wanted to make sure I got my own question in. This one is to Mr. Roo Simmons. I think that a lot of the participants or the attendees here have heard your interview from back in July on the New York Times The Daily podcast. Mm-hmm. In the interview, you made a point about the specificity with which you had to craft the policy in Evanston. I was wondering if you could speak to the importance of specificity when crafting policy on the municipal, state, and federal level.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. It is important that I state that we acknowledge that our local initiative is not going to address the Evanston racial wealth gap. It is very specific. And the specificity of our program allowed us to have a path forward. It allowed our law department. In fact, our law department really led the guidelines and the boundaries in which we were able to craft our remedy based on the injury. And so it's that narrow focus that has allowed us to move forward with an actual plan that is funded, and we will be dispersing in November. Applications open up September 21st, and we will begin dispersing our reparations benefits in November. But it was looking at, what did Evanston do? What were the consequences of that action? In our case, it was a housing zoning law. The consequences where we were limited to a certain area, that area limited us to building wealth through home equity and accessing the same livability in Evanston. And those consequences are measurable in our racial divide today and still evident in our racial discrimination today. So it is a very specific remedy, a housing equity benefit, but it is appropriate because it's a direct response to the harm. And other cities will have to look at their own history and come up with something also very specific and targeted. We wish that we could address all of the injuries that we have, the totality of our emotional trauma and our health disparities and our wealth divide. We understand we can't do that with any local initiative. We don't expect that we will do it with any local initiative. We're doing our part based on our policy, while we also are in strong support for an urgency of HR 40 passing and beginning the work of the commission. But one thing I'd like to add is we have a very transparent process, and you can go to the cityofevanston.org/reparations. You can see our case for reparation is 77 pages. You can see the documents and the other resources that built up the local case and help educate our elected and our community in getting towards the policy that we're at now. And this work began in 2019.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm not sure if we have time for another question here.
One more.
We do.
Yeah, one more.
I think we have time for one more question here. I have a question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee. Says, I've been encouraged on social media to contribute to individual Black Americans' bank accounts as an act of reparations. Do you consider individual acts of transfer of cash, wealth, or other contribution acts of reparation?
So let me just start off with my opinion on that. There should be a process and there should be standards. I am one who does favor private estates, claims for private estate. That doesn't mean that's correct. That's just part of my my belief system. But currently, as far as I know, there are no standards. There's no process for that to occur. So for just someone to say, okay, I'm going to put this in your bank account and that's reparations, that doesn't follow the four elements of reparations that I brought up before. That doesn't follow the international standard for reparations. But perhaps there is some type of process that might be developed through the commission or something along those lines that would allow for that. I don't know. I know there are issues of eminent domain. I know that in California, there was a place called Bruce's Beach, wherein land was stolen, basically taken through eminent domain that was given back sometime last year. There are cases of private estates. There's a woman in Georgia who inherited property, a farm, where she found out her ancestors enslaved Black people. She wanted to do something about it. Good nature, good intention. There need to be standards. There needs to be process. And we're history in the making right now. I tell Robin, she's going to be in the history books. We are making it right now. We don't have all the answers. But the commission, HR 40, is part of that process. We're coming up with some of these answers, coming up with some of this process, and coming up with some of these standards.
And I would just add in real quickly, I may be slightly different than Nkechi because I don't think it's a good idea. I think that is the, in my view, that is the reaction of people who are encouraging someone to do that. Do this, and then you can feel like you've done something about reparations. Instead of putting some money into any Black person's bank account in America, what I personally would prefer you to do is get on the phone Call the people in Congress that represent you. Start talking about why aren't you supporting HR 40? Get in touch with the senators from your state. Why aren't you supporting HR 40? What is it about it that you don't agree with or that you don't understand? And in terms of money, I'd like to just throw this in as we end. Everybody remembers the huge amount of publicity that came to the Tulsa massacre as we hit the 100-year mark after that horrific event occurred. And within less than 19 days, Congress passed a bill saying Juneteenth is a national holiday. Don't make any mistake. Those two things are inextricably connected. The Juneteenth holiday does not happen without the attention on Black Wall Street and Tulsa, Oklahoma that came 19 days before. It cost the United States government, and I've done extensive research on this, cost the United States government $450 million to shut the government down for one day. What that means is that Republicans and conservatives, and forget Republican, conservative, anybody that voted for that bill, and there was bipartisan support for that bill, anybody that voted for it said to America, I am willing to spend $4.5 billion over the next 10 years to recognize a holiday. But if we start talking about reparations, oh, that's too much money. They're willing to spend $4.5 billion on what is, I'm not saying it's just it is a worthless gesture, because it's not. It's an important thing. But the Juneteenth holiday isn't going to put food on anybody's plate. It isn't going to put economic opportunity in anybody's house. It's not going to put education in for anybody's children. So there is an inherent contradiction, it seems to me, about doing things that cost huge amounts of money, but won't change anything. And if people are willing to spend huge amounts of money on stuff that won't change anything, I would prefer that they do that on stuff that will actually have an impact. So my position would be, until those standards that Nkechi talked about are set, and until, I don't want somebody making $36,000 a year putting money into my bank account. They can't afford it. They've got to raise their own family. And that's not going to solve the issue. The issue is going to be solved by state, federal, and local governments and corporations and huge entities that played their role in white supremacy and anti-Black racism in America. It's going to be solved by them coming to the table and by our country requiring them to take appropriate action. So instead of sending money to a Black individual from my vote, get in touch with your congressperson. Get in touch with your senators and ask them why they're not supporting HR 40.
All right. Well, on that note, it's my unhappy duty to end this program. We have run out of time for today. We have definitely not run out of time for continuing to discuss this incredibly deep and provocative range of issues. I want to thank the panelists, one and all, for your energy and your enthusiasm. We've all learned a lot. I'm personally committed to, I think we're going to re-show this in a number of different fora and try to get as large an audience as we possibly can. And I hope that we can get all of you back at some time or another to have follow-up conversations. But thanks to you, thanks to Lissy and Cindy for organizing it, thanks to Dean Ring, thanks to KP and Travis for participating in this, and for the Black Law Students Association for co-sponsoring it. I hope this is the beginning of a really vigorous ongoing conversation that we can play an important part in keeping alive. Thank you all again very, very much.
Yes, thank you so much. The program was recorded. It will be available on YouTube. Someone just asked that in the chat. We will make sure that everyone here has access to the recording, and to the panelists, all of you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have really inspired us, challenged us. We all learned so much. And as Dan said, okay, I'm not bashful. I'll be back in touch, and I hope to bring you all back again, not in 20 years, Jeff.
Okay, that sounds great.
All right, thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you
Thank you. It's our
Thank you,
pleasure.
everybody.